The air in Serenity Lakes was supposed to be a balm for a scarred soul. After 15 years in a world where truth was a commodity and a man's mind was a lock to be picked, I had come seeking the opposite. My name is Tom, and my last job was with an obscure branch of the government, teaching interrogation techniques in windowless rooms to people who didn't officially exist. I was good at it, too good. I knew how to find the fault lines in a person's psyche, the little cracks of fear and insecurity, and pry them open. But the work had taken its toll, leaving me with a profound weariness and a deep-seated need for absolute, uncomplicated peace. My wife, Emily, was the architect of our escape. She found us a home in a community whose very name was a promise: Serenity Lakes. It was a beautiful, sprawling development of custom homes, manicured lawns, and a glittering, man-made lake at its center. We bought a lovely stone and cedar house on a quiet cul-de-sac, a place where the loudest sound was the wind whispering through the tall pines. Here, we would build a new life, a quiet one, our most important project. The reason we had chosen this specific lot with its large, secluded backyard was a garden. It was to be a memorial garden, a quiet place of reflection dedicated to the memory of our son, who we had lost years ago. It was a sacred project, a place where Emily could finally begin to heal. The promise of serenity, however, had a gatekeeper, and she arrived on the second day, before we had even finished unpacking the boxes. She didn't walk up our driveway. She materialized, as if summoned by the unauthorized presence of a moving truck. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly lacquered hair, a golf tan, and eyes that held the cold, acquisitive gleam of a hawk. "I am Patricia Vance," she announced, her voice a finely modulated instrument of authority. She was the president of the Serenity Lakes Homeowners Association. She held a thick, leather-bound binder that she wielded like a shield. "I see your landscape designer's vehicle is still here. I trust you've provided him with the community's architectural and landscaping guidelines." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance," Emily said, ever gracious, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I'm Emily. This is my husband, Tom. We were just going over the preliminary plans for our backyard." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. Plans. The approval process for any landscape modification is quite extensive. And, of course, all major projects must be executed by our community's exclusive, pre-approved landscaping partner, Sterling Landscaping. It ensures a consistent quality and aesthetic throughout the development. I stepped forward, my instincts, long dormant, beginning to stir. I had spent my life analyzing people, and my initial read on Patricia Vance was troubling. The emphasis on exclusive and pre-approved felt less like a concern for aesthetics and more like something else. "We appreciate that, Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice intentionally mild. "However, this is a very personal project for us. A memorial garden. We have a specific designer we've worked with before, someone who understands what we're looking for." A muscle in Patricia's jaw tightened. Her perfectly applied lipstick was drawn into a thin, bloodless line. It was the first sign of a crack in her placid facade. A tell. She was not accustomed to being contradicted. That is not an option. The bylaws are perfectly clear. Use of unapproved contractors is strictly forbidden. Sterling Landscaping has an impeccable reputation and is intimately familiar with our community's standards. I can have their primary designer, my cousin, by the way, give you a call to discuss your project. The mention of her cousin was the final piece of the puzzle. It clicked into place with a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't about standards. This was about money, It was a kickback scheme, a tidy little racket where the HOA president forced residents to use her cousin's overpriced company, from which she undoubtedly received a handsome cut. "Thank you for the information, Mrs. Vance," Emily said, trying to smooth things over. "We'll certainly take that under advisement." "It is not an advisement," Patricia replied, her voice losing all its manufactured warmth. "It is a requirement. I suggest you cancel your appointment with your other designer. It will save you a great deal of trouble in the long run." She gave us a final, withering look, as if we were a pair of particularly stubborn stains she had been tasked with removing from her pristine community. Then she turned and marched back to her golf cart, a queen, leaving the presence of uncooperative peasants. Emily and I stood in the driveway, the scent of pine and fresh-cut grass suddenly feeling less like a promise and more like a warning. "Well," Emily said, a note of disbelief in her voice. "She seems intense." "She's corrupt," I said, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "This isn't an HOA. It's a protection racket, and we just refuse to pay." I had come to this place to escape a world of conflict and psychological warfare. But as I watched Patricia Vance's golf cart disappear around the corner, a grim realization settled over me. I had not escaped. I had simply relocated the battlefield, and the first shot had just been fired. Patricia Vance's opening salvo in her war against our garden was a relentless barrage of paper. The official violation notices began appearing in our mailbox with the grim regularity of a ticking clock. Each was a masterpiece of petty tyranny, a carefully chosen nitpick designed to needle, harass, and wear us down. The first notice was for our garden hose. It was a standard, high-quality green rubber hose, neatly coiled on a decorative brass holder. According to the notice, we were in violation of Bylaw 22 Section D, which stipulated that all garden hoses must be stored in an enclosed, HOA-approved storage container. The fine was $50. To keep the peace, I went to the approved hardware store and purchased the ridiculously overpriced beige plastic box she required. It was an ugly, soulless thing, but it was compliant. We paid the fine. I wanted to show that we were willing to be reasonable, to follow the legitimate rules. I was offering a de-escalation. She did not take it. The following week, a new notice arrived. Our lawn, after a spell of rain, was 1/4 of an inch over the maximum allowable height of 3 inches. The notice came with a grainy, zoomed-in photograph as evidence. The fine was $75. Again, we complied. I mowed the lawn that same day. My jaw clenched. My internal monologue, however, was shifting. The part of my brain that analyzed threats was beginning to stir. Subject P, V, is not responding to compliance. The goal is not adherence to the rules. The goal is submission. The strategy of appeasement is failing. The fines continued, each more ludicrous than the last. We were fined for parking our car too close to the edge of our own driveway. We were fined because a package was left on our doorstep for more than 3 hours. A clutter violation. With each new fine, I documented everything. I created a new, encrypted file on my laptop, scanning each notice and each check. It was a habit from a world where a flawless paper trail was the foundation of every successful operation. After the 6th fine, I decided the time for passive compliance was over. I spent an evening researching local ordinances and state laws governing HOAs. The law in our state allowed homeowners to use licensed and insured contractors of their choice for work on their private property, as long as the final result complied with aesthetic covenants. An HOA could recommend a vendor, but they could not mandate an exclusive one, especially if that vendor was family-related. a clear conflict of interest. Armed with this, I drafted a formal letter to the entire HOA board. Dear members of the board, I wrote, we are writing to express our concern over the recent series of violation notices we have received. We are new to this community, and we are making every effort to be good neighbors. However, the sheer volume and trivial nature of these fines are beginning to feel less like a good faith effort to maintain standards and more like a targeted campaign of harassment. I listed each violation and fine. Then, I addressed the core issue. This pattern of intense scrutiny began immediately after we informed Mrs. Vance of our intention to use our own landscape designer. As per state law, I cited the specific statute. Homeowners have the right to choose their own licensed contractors. The mandate to use an exclusive, board-affiliated contractor may constitute a tortious interference with business relations and a breach of the board's fiduciary duty. We respectfully request that the board review this matter and ensure that the enforcement of the bylaws is being applied fairly and not as a tool to pressure residents into a specific commercial arrangement. I sent the letter via certified mail. It was a carefully calibrated move, signaling that I knew the law and was prepared to defend my rights, while still maintaining a formal, non-emotional tone. It officially put the entire board on notice. Patricia's response was not another fine. It was an act of personal, malicious cruelty that signaled a dark turning point. It was an act that told me, in no uncertain terms, that the war for our peace was about to escalate dramatically. The shredded plans were what broke Emily's heart. She had spent weeks working with our landscape designer, Isabella, to create the perfect layout for our son's memorial garden. The plans were a work of art, hand-drawn on heavy vellum. It was more than just a blueprint. It was a map of her hope. One evening, we made the mistake of leaving the rolled-up plans on the table on our back porch. The next morning, they were gone. After a frantic search, we found them in the bushes at the edge of our property. They had been systematically ripped into small, jagged pieces and doused in what smelled like motor oil. Emily sank to her knees, a sob catching in her throat. I stood over her, a feeling of cold, lethal rage building in my chest. This was a desecration. It was a direct attack on the memory of our son. There was no proof, but we both knew who was responsible. This was Patricia Vance's answer to my letter. This was her way of saying, "Your laws mean nothing. I can touch you whenever I want." That afternoon, while Emily sat inside, quietly weeping, I began to build my fortress. The time for compliance was over. My family had been targeted. The part of me that I had tried to bury, the cold, analytical man who designed systems to protect against the worst of human nature, came roaring back. My first step was to design a security system, but I did it by the book. I researched local ordinances on residential surveillance, noting the specific requirements for camera placement and signage regarding audio recording. Our state was a one-party consent state for audio, meaning as long as one party in a conversation knew it was being recorded it was legal on my own property. I purchased a system that was, by suburban standards, an act of extreme overkill. I bought 4 pan-tilt zoom PTZ cameras with half-mile infrared illuminators, covert weatherproof microphones, and a networked video recorder with a redundant, solid-state drive. This was not going to be a simple installation. It was going to be a tactical one. I wanted to create a data-rich environment. I mounted the cameras myself, placing them high on the eaves to provide overlapping, 360-degree coverage. I placed the microphones in discrete locations, shielded from the wind, inside, in my office. I set up the command center, integrating the entire system into a sophisticated software suite that didn't just record, It analyzed. It could log every person and vehicle that approached our property. As I sat there, watching the 4 crystal-clear video feeds on my monitor, my internal monologue was a cascade of old, familiar jargon. Perimeter is secure. Multiple data collection points are active. Now, establish a baseline. The subject, P.V., will not be able to approach this property again without my knowing it. Her anonymity is gone. A few days later, a newly planted dogwood sapling near the front of the garden was snapped cleanly in half. It was another petty, drive-by act of vandalism. But this time, it was different. I had a recording, a long-distance shot, taken in the dead of night, of a landscaping truck, one with the Sterling Landscaping logo clearly visible on the side, slowing down in front of our house. A figure had gotten out, run onto the lawn, and snapped the tree before jumping back in the truck and speeding away. The image of the person was too blurry for a positive ID, but the truck was unmistakable. It was a direct link in the chain. It was proof that her family's company was being used to harass us. It was the first hard piece of evidence in the case I was now methodically, relentlessly building against her. Patricia Vance had no idea she was now fighting a ghost, a man who saw everything, heard everything, and was waiting for her to make one final, fatal mistake. With our home now a virtual fortress, Patricia shifted her campaign to the battlefield of reputation. She set out to methodically poison our name, to isolate us, and paint us as the villains in a narrative she controlled. Her primary weapon was the social architecture of Serenity Lakes, the monthly community newsletter, and the exclusive neighborhood social events. The newsletter, the Serenity Sentinel, was her personal propaganda machine. In her President's Corner column, she wrote a masterpiece of innuendo, "A Community in Harmony." The headline read, "One of the great joys of living in Serenity Lakes is our shared commitment to a unified aesthetic. It is a sign of respect for one's neighbors." Sadly, it has come to our attention that some newer residents do not share this vision. This refusal to cooperate not only hurts property values, but it also creates an unfortunate atmosphere of discord. It was a brilliant piece of psychological warfare. She had framed us as selfish, disrespectful city dwellers who were actively harming the community. The social events were even worse. Emily and I forced ourselves to attend the HOA's monthly wine and cheese social, hoping to counteract the rumors. We walked into a room that fell into a sudden, noticeable hush. Conversations faltered. We were treated like a bad smell. Patricia, holding court in the center of the room, made a great show of ignoring us, her eyes flicking in our direction with a smug, triumphant look. Driving home, Emily was silent. "They hate us. Tom," she whispered. "They don't even know us. And they hate us." "They don't hate us, Em," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "They're reacting to a narrative fed to them by a manipulative, corrupt woman." But the isolation was painful, and it was taking a toll on the peace we had come here to find. That night, I decided to move from a defensive to an offensive posture. Not an attack, but an intelligence-gathering operation. I made a call to a former colleague, Marcus, now a high-ranking official at the agency. "Hey, Marcus," I said, "it's Houdini." "Tom, I thought you'd retired." He chuckled. "Don't tell me you're getting back in the game." "No, this is strictly personal. But I'm dealing with a subject who is using classic disinformation and coercion tactics. I need to know what her leverage points are. I'm not asking for anything classified. Just a tutorial on the best open-source intelligence tools you guys are using these days. I want to see what I can find in the public record." Marcus pointed me toward a few powerful search databases and social media aggregators. For the next few nights, I became the man I used to be, patiently sifting through terabytes of public data. I started with Patricia Vance and her husband, then moved on to her cousin and Sterling Landscaping. What I found was the key to the entire conflict. Patricia's husband's construction business was on the verge of bankruptcy. Public records showed multiple lawsuits from suppliers for non-payment and a massive balloon payment due on a commercial loan in less than 6 months. The kickbacks she was getting from Sterling Landscaping weren't just for pocket money. They were a desperate attempt to keep her family financially afloat. I dug deeper into her cousin's landscaping company. I found his business's social media page. It was full of pictures of his crew. Among them were two thuggish-looking men who appeared in nearly every photo, their arms covered in cheap tattoos, their expressions sullen. I saved their pictures. Their names were Kevin O'Malley and Rick Peterson. I ran their names through a public records database. Kevin had a string of petty theft convictions. Rick had a recent charge for misdemeanor assault. I now had names, faces, and a motive. Patricia's aggression wasn't just born of a need for control. It was born of sheer, abject desperation. She wasn't just a bully. She was a cornered animal, fighting for her financial survival. And that made her infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more predictable. I now knew her fear. And in my old world, knowing your enemy's fear was the beginning of their end. Having failed to intimidate us with social pressure, and with her financial desperation mounting, Patricia's campaign of harassment entered a new and more dangerous phase. She began to weaponize the full weight of city and county bureaucracy against us. The first attack came from the City Code Enforcement Office. A stern-faced inspector arrived to investigate an anonymous complaint about an unpermitted structure being built in our backyard. The structure was the simple flagstone pathway for our memorial garden. I met the inspector at the door, binder in hand. "Good morning," I said calmly. "Here are the approved plans for our landscaping project, along with the permit issued by your office last month." The inspector reviewed the documents, sighed, and apologized for wasting our time. "That explains it," he muttered. The second official visit was from the County Environmental Health Department. A young woman arrived to investigate a report that we were using banned, high-toxicity pesticides. This accusation was particularly vile, as Emily was a passionate organic gardener. I walked the inspector through our garden, showing her our compost bins and organic fertilizers. She took some soil samples as a matter of procedure, but it was obvious she knew the complaint was baseless. Before she left, she gave me her card. "If you get any more complaints like this," she said, "call me directly. This is a waste of resources." The final visit was the one that pushed me to my limit. A squad car from the local police department pulled into our driveway. A young officer got out and explained that he was responding to a welfare check. A concerned neighbor called. He explained, looking uncomfortable. They reported they hadn't seen your wife in several days, and that they heard shouting from the house. They were concerned for her safety. I felt a surge of ice-cold fury. Patricia was now implying that I was a domestic abuser. At that moment, Emily came to the door, her face smudged with dirt, a bright smile on her face. "Hello, officer," she said cheerfully. "Is everything all right?" The officer looked from Emily's happy face to me, and the tension in his shoulders visibly eased. He apologized and left. After he was gone, I stood in the driveway, my hands clenched into fists. This had crossed a line from harassment into dangerous, malicious slander that could have real-world consequences. I had a mountain of evidence, but so far, none of it was a direct, prosecutable threat. The next day, I took my entire dossier, The letters, the videos, the public records on Patricia's financial troubles, the false reports from city agencies, and I went to the local police department. I didn't ask to file a report. I asked for a meeting with a detective. I sat down with a Detective Miller, a veteran cop with tired but intelligent eyes. For an hour, I laid out the entire story, presenting my evidence in a calm, chronological, and analytical manner. I didn't present it as a victim. I presented it as an analyst laying out a case file. Detective Miller listened intently, examining the documents and watching the video clips. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "this is one of the most thorough civilian-compiled cases of harassment I've ever seen. The problem is, so far, it's all civil. She's a terrible person, but she hasn't technically broken a criminal statute in a way we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The vandalism can't be definitively pinned on her, and the slander, while awful, is hard to prosecute." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "But her pattern of escalation is clear, and it's deeply concerning. People like this, when they get cornered, they get reckless. She's going to do something stupid, something that crosses the line from civil harassment to a clear-cut felony." He handed me his business card. "You have my direct line. The moment she makes a direct, tangible threat, a threat of physical harm, extortion, anything like that, you call me. You get it on camera, you get it on audio, and you call me. At that point, it becomes a criminal matter, and we can act." I left the station with a clear mission. I was no longer just a passive data collector. I was an active participant, working in concert with law enforcement. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the cornered animal to make her final, desperate move. The final escalation, the act that pushed our Cold War into a hot one, was a direct and terrifying threat against my wife's safety. Patricia, having failed to break us with bylaws, vandalism, slander, or the authorities, had finally shed the last vestiges of civilized behavior. Her desperation had curdled into pure, malevolent aggression. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in town picking up supplies, and Emily was home alone, tending to the new rose bushes she had planted along the front walkway. The garden was her sanctuary. Two men on loud black motorcycles rumbled up our quiet cul-de-sac. They were the two men from her cousin's social media page, Kevin O'Malley and Rick Peterson. They pulled their bikes to a halt at the end of our driveway, blocking it completely. The sudden silence was more menacing than the noise. Emily, startled, stood up. The two men just sat on their bikes, staring at her. Kevin slowly pulled a large hunting knife from a sheath on his belt and began cleaning his fingernails with the tip. It was a calculated act of psychological intimidation. Finally, Kevin spoke, his voice a low sneer. "Nice flowers. Be a real shame if something happened to 'em, or to this nice little house." The other one, Rick, chuckled. "Yeah, a real shame. The lady who runs this neighborhood, Mrs. Vance, she says you people ain't been cooperative. Says you need to learn to be part of the team. We're the welcoming committee." They revved their engines, the roar shattering the peaceful afternoon. Emily, though terrified, stood her ground. She slowly backed away toward the front door, fumbling for her phone. She called me, her voice a panicked whisper. "Tom, there are two men here. They're scaring me." I heard the roar of their engines in the background. "I'm on my way. Em, lock the doors. Stay on the line. I'm 5 minutes out." My next call was to Detective Miller. "Detective," I said, my voice cold and precise. "It's Tom Hayes. The escalation is happening. Right now. 2 men, Kevin O'Malley and Rick Peterson, are at my house, intimidating my wife. My cameras are recording. I'm on my way there now. I need a unit dispatched, but have them hold a block away. I'm going to get a confession on tape." "Understood," Miller replied, his voice all business. "Units are rolling. Proceed with caution. We'll be on your signal." I pulled into the cul-de-sac and saw them instantly. They were still there, lounging by their bikes, confident. I saw Emily's terrified face in the window. A switch flipped in my brain. The quiet, retired man vanished. The operator took his place. I parked my car behind theirs, blocking any retreat. I got out, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked at the 2 men. My mind was a flurry of cold calculations based on the dossier I had already built. "Your old lady called you Kevin," sneered as I approached. I ignored him. I started the audio recorder on my phone, which was connected to a discreet earpiece. I began to speak, my voice quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the air with the precision of a scalpel. This was my interrogation room, and the clock had started. The climax was not a brawl. It was a systematic, psychological dismantling, executed with the cold precision of a surgeon. As I walked slowly toward the 2 thugs, my objective was clear: obtain a confession and neutralize the threat before the uniformed police arrived. "What are you gonna do?" Old man Kevin O'Malley sneered, puffing out his chest. I stopped a few feet from him, my posture relaxed, my hands visible. "Kevin O'Malley," I said, my voice calm. "I've seen you on your cousin's landscaping company's Facebook page. Is that the same bike you took to the rally in Dayton last month? I noticed you had some trouble with the starter then, too." His bravado faltered. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact that showed I knew who he was. He wasn't an anonymous, intimidating biker. He was an employee I had already identified. I turned my attention to the second man, and Rick Peterson. "You're a long way from your sister's place over on Elm Street. How's that child support warrant out of Franklin County treating you? It's all a matter of public record, you know. A real shame if an officer happened to run your name right now." Rick's face went pale. I wasn't guessing. I was using the information I had methodically gathered from public databases weeks ago. I was showing them they were not ghosts. They were known quantities. Their vulnerabilities already mapped. "So, here is what is going to happen now," I said, my voice cold and precise. I gestured to the small, almost invisible camera lens in the soffit above the garage. "My security system is currently recording this conversation in high-definition video and audio. In approximately 2 minutes, sheriff's deputies, who are waiting just down the street, will arrive. I will provide them with this recording of you trespassing on my property and making terroristic threats against my wife, a felony in this state." Their confidence completely shattered. They were no longer predators. They were trapped. "I will also provide them with your names." I continued relentlessly. "They will run them. They will find your outstanding warrant. Rick, they will be very interested in your prior convictions. Kevin, and they will be extremely interested to know that you were hired to commit these felonies by Patricia Vance, the president of the Homeowners Association." I let that sink in. I had laid out their entire predicament, the full weight of the legal consequences they were facing. "However," I said, offering the classic interrogator's lifeline, the illusion of a way out. "You have one, and only one, opportunity to mitigate your own situation. You can tell me, right now, on this recording, that Patricia Vance hired you to come here and intimidate my wife. You can confess, and that confession, offered freely, might earn you some leniency with the district attorney, or you can remain silent, and I will let the video of your unprovoked threats speak for itself. That's when they broke. "Please, man," Kevin blurted out, dropping the tough guy act entirely. "Don't call the cops on us. We'll go. We'll go right now." "She made us do it," Rick wailed, his voice cracking. "Patricia Vance. She paid us $500 each, said all we had to do was scare the lady. We weren't gonna hurt nobody. I swear. She said you were trying to ruin her cousin's business." They were begging, tumbling over each other to confess, to shift the blame, to save themselves. My phone had recorded every self-incriminating word. "Thank you, gentlemen," I said, as the first clear wail of a police siren began to cut through the air. That was very helpful. I had already given the signal to Detective Miller. The trap had been sprung. The resolution was swift and decisive. The arrival of 2 squad cars, sirens screaming, turned our quiet cul-de-sac into a scene of flashing red and blue lights. Kevin and Rick surrendered with a pathetic eagerness, hands in the air. Their psychological collapse was so complete that they began confessing to the deputies on the spot, implicating Patricia Vance as the mastermind. I provided Detective Miller with the USB drive containing the full, unedited video and audio file. It was a prosecutor's dream, a crystal-clear recording of the 2 men trespassing, making threats, and then a full confession naming Patricia. An hour later, as Emily and I sat in our kitchen, the police cruiser pulled up in front of Patricia Vance's immaculate home. We watched as she was escorted out, her face a mask of shocked disbelief, and placed in the back of the squad car in handcuffs. Her reign of corruption and intimidation was over. The legal fallout for Patricia was catastrophic. She was charged with multiple felonies, including conspiracy to make terroristic threats and extortion. The investigation that followed uncovered her entire kickback scheme with her cousin's landscaping company, leading to additional charges of fraud. Faced with the undeniable video evidence and the full testimony of her hired thugs, she took a plea bargain that included a short prison sentence, a lengthy probation, and a massive restitution payment. She and her husband, now bankrupt, were forced to sell their home and leave Serenity Lakes in disgrace. The HOA was thrown into chaos. The entire board resigned. The subsequent financial audit revealed the extent of Patricia's corruption. A new board was elected, comprised of decent, reasonable people who immediately terminated the exclusive contract with Sterling Landscaping and overhauled the bylaws to ensure transparency. The charges against Kevin and Rick were reduced in exchange for their testimony. They received probation and a stern warning to stay out of our lives. For Emily and me, the peace we had so desperately sought finally descended upon our home. The cloud of hostility that had hung over us lifted. Neighbors would stop by to apologize, to express their shock and their gratitude. We were finally left alone to build our garden. Over the next few months, we transformed our backyard into the beautiful, tranquil sanctuary we had always dreamed of. It became a place of profound peace, a testament to our resilience. I had come to Serenity Lakes to bury the man I used to be. I had not expected to have to call upon his dark skills one last time, but in doing so, by using strategy, patience, and the unyielding power of the law, I had protected my wife, defended our home, and secured the quiet life we had earned. The ghosts of my past had been exorcised, not by running from them, but by using them to bring order out of chaos, once and for all.